Essence of Thoughts is a professional YouTube atheist who from all appearances seems to be a master of sophistry. Now he, like many atheists, have to draw attention to their supposed intelligence by either naming themselves something like logical, rational, and skeptic, or in this case having a picture of the brain. After watching this and vids from guys like Rationality Rules, along with a bunch of other atheists, it's become apparent to me they all suffer from a chronic case of the Dunning-Kruger effect. In today's video, I will be tackling a video done in order to debunk philosopher William Lane Craig in his Kalam Cosmological Argument.
Well, I take some issue with your rather vague terminology in the opening, i.e. material universe. What is it you mean by this? Do you mean that which we can observe as part of space-time, or do you mean that which is natural, i.e. not being reliant upon supernatural?
What they mean is all of physical reality. I don't see how you miss that. Here's Craig going over that.
Next, he gets into the definition of universe, and he discusses your definition. He says Craig defines the universe as being all of material reality, and then says this is hardly what scientists mean by universe.
Well, I took this definition from what scientists mean. He left out one word, and that is contiguous. I think the universe is all of contiguous material reality. It allows that there could be other universes which are causally unconnected with our universe.
What you fail to note, however, is that none of these observed experiences even touch upon the topic actually being discussed in your video. You see, you are switching between the colloquial usage of coming into existence and the very technical usage. When we see something coming into existence, like the examples you gave of cars, trees, paintings, etc., we don't actually see the formation of matter and energy. Instead, all we actually see is the rearrangement and transferal of pre-existing matter and energy. Nothing is technically coming into existence outside our abstract thought on what makes a rabbit over a chair. To claim the transferal and rearrangement of pre-existing matter and energy is equivalent to the formation of either of these things in such a way is a fallacy of equivocation.
No, what you've shown here is you don't know anything about Aristotle and the four causes, which are material, efficient, formal, and final causes. Cause here is used to mean efficient cause, and it is used consistently throughout. An efficient cause is a thing which brings its effect into being. A painting's efficient cause is the artist. The argument throughout is talking about efficient causes.
Now, in formulating the Kalam Cosmological Argument, I intended to speak of what Aristotle called efficient causes. Aristotle distinguished between efficient causes and material causes. An efficient cause is what brings an effect into being, what produces an effect in existence, while a material cause is the stuff out of which the thing is made. So, for example, Michelangelo was the efficient cause of the statue David, and the material cause of David was the block of marble that Michelangelo sculpted.
It is further reliant upon a fallacy of composition, i.e. some part of X has a certain quality, therefore X has this quality as a whole. A good example of this is how the human cell is invisible to the naked eye. Now, a composition fallacy of this fact would be the claim that a human as a whole must also be invisible to the naked eye.
The Kalam doesn't commit a composition fallacy. Here is what Craig says on it.
I have never argued that because every part of the universe has a cause, therefore the whole universe has a cause. That would be manifestly fallacious. Rather, the reasons I've offered for thinking that everything that begins to exist has a cause are these. Number one, something cannot come from nothing. To claim that something can come into being out of nothing is worse than magic. Two, if something can come into being from nothing, it becomes inexplicable why just anything or everything doesn't come into being from nothing. Think about it. Why don't bicycles and Beethoven and root beer come into being out of nothing? Why is it only universes that can pop into being from nothing? What makes nothingness so discriminatory? There can't be anything about nothingness that favors universes, for nothingness doesn't have any properties, nor can anything constrain nothingness, since there isn't anything to be constrained. Number 3, common experience and scientific evidence confirm the truth of premise 1. Premise 1 is constantly verified and never falsified. It's hard to understand how any atheist committed to modern science could deny that premise 1 is more plausibly true than false in light of the evidence. Now, note well that the third reason is an appeal to inductive reasoning, not reasoning by composition. It's drawing an inductive inference about all the members of a class of things based on a sample of the class. Inductive reasoning undergirds all of science and is not to be confused with reasoning by composition, which is a fallacy. So this objection is simply aimed at a straw man of the objector's own construction.
But that's how science operates, testing the claims made in light of new evidence as opposed to shunning it for those made in old ignorance. There are still plenty of models out there actually being tested, and not a single one suggests a divine origin. Likewise, the Kalam is one of the oldest ones and has been falsified from every single angle imaginable. The premise in themselves fail to get off the ground at any level, but you ignore that fact, displaying rampant confirmation bias. Science could have a million wrong ideas, but that wouldn't make yours any more correct.
They weren't targeting the method itself, but rather the motivation and history for going through with the models and methods. Scientists didn't like the idea of a beginning of the universe, so they made models to try to explain it away. They thought Lemaitre was trying to concord science with scripture, and thought that the Big Bang had theistic notions in it. Second thing I'd like to point out is that expecting a scientific model to suggest a divine origin is like asking someone how the color blue tastes. It's a category error, as science deals with the natural world and God is the supernatural. All we can do is use science and philosophy to help infer God or disconfirm God. I'd also like to point out that God isn't a scientific question. As British philosopher / theologian Keith Ward once said, the question of God is certainly a factual one, but not a scientific one. Instead, it lies at the very deep level of metaphysical options. Also, simply saying something has been debunked over and over again doesn't make it true, and affirming passionately the same false objections as true, despite clarifications from Craig, which he did all the way back in 2010 at Biola University, which is 6 years prior to this video, doesn't make you look like the hallmark of a logical and rational person, but of an ignorant or dishonest paid-for polemicist engaging in sophistry and argumentum ad nauseams. The whole charge of confirmation bias is just a projection because you show that you have not been even bothered to see if your facts are straight.
This entire argument comes down to how we define beginning. Do you define it as a point where time started, or do you include aspects outside of this, i.e. timeless existence? Just keep that question in mind.
The argument defines beginning to exist as something X begins to exist at some time T if and only if X exists at T, there is no time before T at which X exists, and there is no state of affairs in the actual world in which X exists timelessly.
Now, when discussing the attributes of God, you acknowledge existence outside of time. Now, you also assert, without any basis, that said thing must be spaceless, immaterial, and uncaused. But all I need is timeless, as in the timeless state to the universe which existed at the very center of singularity. Fact is, we don't know anything about this point. We don't yet have the technology to explore it, and we don't even know if that will ever be possible. Science at the current does not know, and neither do you.
The basis is deductive. If time, matter, and space came into being, then the cause by logic couldn't be those things, because then you're basically asserting that they existed before they existed, which is absurd. It would be uncaused and powerful because of the fact of being timeless and being able to bring the universe into existence. Also, I'd like to note how funny it is he accuses the theist of claiming to know this, when in reality the argument, as any philosopher will tell you, is probabilistic. If the argument works, at best it is probabilistic that the universe had a cause and began to exist and therefore by deduction had God. Now you said all you need is time, but you should know you're opening yourself to be criticized for not having explanatory power. While the theist can deduce those multiple properties, you choose only one, thus limiting your explanatory power and scope. Now I'm going to jump into his Occam's cosmological argument, and I'm going to debunk it. I have multiple objections. For premise 1, it is not true. Now, while you say this principle isn't directly Occam's razor, it mirrors it and you don't use the real definition and it hurts you. This makes your first premise a straw man fallacy. The real definition is that explanations that make more unnecessary assumptions are less likely to be correct than ones that make fewer assumptions. Please note the word unnecessary. Occam's razor is a principle to make sure the assumptions you add are explanatory and needed, not just about making less assumptions. Hypothetically, if we both had to explain a phenomenon, and my theory had 10 assumptions that were all explanatory and needed, and yours only had 2 assumptions that weren't explanatory and as needed, your guess would still be wrong. Also, skeptics use it as if it were an axiom when it isn't. Here's a quote from physicist Philip Gibbs on the matter. The principle of simplicity works as a heuristic rule of thumb, but some people quote it as if it's an axiom of physics. It is not. It can work well in philosophy or article physics, but less often so in cosmology or psychology, where things usually turn out to be more complicated than you ever expected. The law of parsimony is no substitute for insight, logic, and the scientific method. It should never be relied upon to make or defend a conclusion. As arbiters of correctness, only logical consistency and empirical evidence are absolute. So there goes the first premise, therefore invalidating the entire argument, but let's go further here. Premise 2 is wrong. There was no physical universe prior to the Big Bang. Therefore, that is one property you can assign to God that you can't assign to the universe with equal assumption. Premise 3 is also wrong, as it rejects religious experiences and doesn't offer an argument against them. Just because you and your atheist friends haven't observed God personally doesn't mean you can dismiss the possibility that he has revealed himself to people. Also, this is a black and white fallacy, because it assumes empirical, aka inductive reasoning, is the only way we can come to know something is a stronger position, when this isn't the case. For matters of economics, we very much use deductive reasoning to apply theories to cases, and that is only one of the many ways we can know if a position is stronger or weaker. God can be a matter of deduction. Also, technically speaking, we don't know with 100% certainty the universe as we know it exists. It could be possible that solipsism is true and I'm just imagining this all, or it could be possible that I'm just a brain in a vat, but that is a small nitpick. In conclusion, the premises of your argument are faulty, therefore the conclusions you have are faulty.
The whole basis of the Kalam proving the existence of God rests on the previously proven existence of God.
You don't understand the Kalam. The Kalam isn't directly arguing for God, but rather it is arguing the universe began to exist and had a cause. Once you grant the argument, by consequence you're left with a cause that would need its aforementioned properties, which you are left with essentially 2 options for the cause. Either an abstract object like numbers, or 2, a mind. Since abstract objects don't cause anything, only the mind exists.
That's not to mention the actual second and third conclusion that are never actually written down, i.e., that cause must be a god, and that god must be my god, which both equally lack any basis.
They're not written down intentionally because that is not what the argument is supposed to do. The argument is supposed to show that the universe had a cause and it wasn't meant to point to any specific god. You are straw-manning the argument. Take it like this. The Kalam isn't an argument for Christianity, but it is an argument against atheism.
The Kalam is dead. It has been cut down by so many people in so many years over the centuries. And yet, like a bad movie franchise, it keeps popping up with poor sequel after poor sequel. Sadly, I doubt this argument to be going away anytime soon. The best we can do is equip ourselves with the knowledge to effectively tackle it.
This is another example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Yes, many people have responded to it, but newsflash, responding to something isn't equal to debunking it. That's like saying the round earth theory has been debunked for centuries because people have been responding to it for that long, and there is hundreds of YouTube videos debunking it. To be honest though, the flat earthers are just as qualified in science as you are in philosophy. Overall, this video was a huge disappointment with no logic or rationality in it. Your Patreon supporters should demand a refund because they have been deceived into thinking you're an intellectual, probably because of your accent and your logo, and you've sold nothing but sophistry and propaganda to them. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.